Hi there, and welcome to another interview. Today, I've got a fascinating story from Andrew Scarborough. So, without further ado, I'm going to say, Andrew, what is your story?
My story, I was expecting the question about why I got on the carnivore diet. You threw me with that one. Well, it goes quite a ways back. I was diagnosed with a malignant brain tumor in early 2013 after suffering from quite horrific migraines for a year and symptoms that I didn't realize were as serious as they were. This is having been what I initially thought was a very fit and healthy young man who was on what I at the time considered to be a perfect diet where I'd lived to be over 100 and have no issues. And I didn't have any health issues, serious health issues in my family. So I thought, this is odd that I'm suddenly having all these migraines. And so initially I went to see my GP and I was just told that it was stress related. And so, because I like to try and solve any issues with diet, I decided to quit my job as a personal trainer. That's what I was doing at the time. And went to study a master's in nutritional therapy. Now, when I was doing that master's, I was trying to fix myself as well as learning more about nutrition. And I kept having these migraines, whatever new thing I was trying to at least have some kind of life, because at that time it was becoming more and more debilitating to the point where I kept missing lectures. But there was one that I attended which I found very interesting, which was actually on the ketogenic diet and how it had been used for nearly a century for children with drug-resistant epilepsy. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. And then there was this idea from some preclinical studies that it could potentially be part of a management strategy for treating brain tumors. And I completely dismissed it. I thought, this is ridiculous. Didn't even know anything about brain tumors at the time, but I thought, no, that's not healthy. I'm on the healthiest diet. I was on a pescatarian diet, and I thought, this is like just the best thing. And before that, I tried a vegetarian diet for a while, but then I thought, I'll add the fish in because fish is good. And I actually, before that, I'd done a vegan diet for 6 months as like with someone's dissertation at university. So that was interesting. But yeah, that's going off on a tangent. Anyway, I assumed that I was metabolically healthy and just wondered why I was experiencing this these strange headaches. And then I felt like I had the worst flu ever. And I was continuing to train through it until the point whereby I was on a train coming home to see my mum, and this pain in my head just got more and more excruciating, and it felt like my head was in a vice-like grip, like I was in one of those nutcrackers. I felt like my head was in one of those, and the pressure was intensifying to the point where I just wanted to die. It's pretty horrific. And then I just felt this sensation as though I was hit on the side of the head very, very hard with a hammer. I made lots of strange yelping noises I couldn't control, and then everything just went blank. I did also feel, just as that was happening, like someone had turned on a tap in my head, like there was water running through. Very strange feeling and a strange taste. And yeah, suddenly I woke up on the other side of the train, This was a very busy train, by the way, so there's lots of commotion, and I was very confused. I was surprised and just in a daze, thinking, "How am I even still alive? Is it some strange dream?" I was just it felt like I was glued to the floor, and at the same time, I felt like I was floating. Very strange, very odd sensation, and I could just hear muffled sounds above me. Um, from paramedics who then shuffled me off the train to um, the nearest hospital in a stretcher. And then all I remember at that point was going in and out of consciousness, suffering from quite horrible seizures, whereby every time I would wake up, I would have suffered. I realized I suffered quite quite just quite horrible um quite horrible injuries that initially I had this feeling of euphoria after having it these seizures, and then when that feeling wore off, it was just intense pain, and I couldn't move because the pain was so, it was like this searing pain through my bones. And I'd suffered um quite a few injuries, including this shoulder. It had been dislocated a few. My tongue looked like it'd gone through a blender. I had quite bad bruising all over me, and it was just I didn't know what was going on. It was very, it's a very confusing time, and suddenly had my family around me, including my dad, my dad lives abroad, so I knew it was serious when he turned up. And I had all of these doctors and nurses and student doctors around, looking very keen and interested because they're learning something new. It looked, so I was thinking, oh, this is not a usual day. What's going on? And then I was told something's wrong with your brain. We found, we just that we found there's something wrong with your brain. And my first feeling was actually a feeling of relief, which sounds odd, but I'd suffered a lot of trauma in my childhood, and I didn't behave like other children. I won't go into detail about the trauma, but it's pretty bad. And yeah, so I had I had clinical depression from a young age, and I saw lots of mental health professionals because my teachers at school made me see them because I wasn't interacting normally with other kids or with the teachers. And so I finally thought, after I was told there's something wrong with your brain, then that I thought that's a relief because you can do something about it, right? And I thought, I don't have anything serious wrong with me because I'm so healthy. So they can fix it and it'll be fine. And then I was told it looks like you have a cavernous hemangioma, which is, well, initially I was told arteriovenous malformation, which is even more, it's more serious and that can kill you. And I wasn't too happy about that. But then they said, oh no, I think we've made a mistake and it's actually this cavernous hemangioma. No, don't worry about it. It's causing you to have these horrible seizures, which could kill you. But but don't worry because we can fix it. And if your seizures calm down, you could even live with this, and we don't even have to take it out. It's kind of like a volcano erupting, and every time it erupts, you have a seizure. So yeah, I was thinking, I'm not sure you've got this right because I just feel horrific. And I was still in hospital, and it's been a few days at this point. And I had to have another scan once the blood had cleared, because this was a highly vascular mass in my head, and I'd only just had a hemorrhage, so had to wait for things to calm down to have a scan to see things more clearly. And then I was told, oh, this is definitely a cavernous angioma. There was just this massive, just looked kind of like berries. Just a bunch of berries just clustered in one area of my brain. And fortunately, I didn't have any contrast. So potentially they could have picked up something more specific if there was contrast, but they didn't think this was a malignancy anyway. So they thought, oh, it's fine. And the reason I didn't have contrast is because the contrast dye is because to visualize whatever is because I had a compromised blood-brain barrier from where the hemorrhage and where the mass was pushing against that part of my brain where the barrier was. So yeah, it kind of just spilled over and caused a mess. And so yeah, I had that scan and I was told definitely cavernous angioma, don't worry. We'll see how you go in hospital for a bit longer, and then you can go home, and then we'll work out what we'll do. And my seizures were just getting worse, so I was told you can have an operation, but you'll have to wait. It could be up to 8 months because it's on the NHS. And I said, well, I can't wait because these seizures are just, I can't live like this. And I can't just wait for it to get better. It got a bit better after I was pumped full of loads of anti-seizure drugs. It was intravenous rather than pill form because it was like an emergency thing. Had to be immediate treatment for that. So I suffered a lot of brain damage from all those seizures, and I lost my speech at the time. It would come sometimes where I could say a few words, but it was very challenging. And my family were very concerned. My mum actually slept in the hospital chair for a few days while I was waiting for answers. And in the end, we decided to go private just so I could receive this operation because I couldn't live like that, and I couldn't go home. I was stuck in this hospital. And so I had the operation. Before the operation, the surgeon was assuring me that this definitely wasn't a brain tumor because I was thinking this must be a brain tumor. Looks like a brain tumor, sounds like a brain tumor. Everything indicated that to me from the limited knowledge that I'd had and through my experiences how I felt. And so I had the operation. I saw the discharge notes and it said cavernous angioma. So I thought, oh, interesting. And then I had, because I'd suffered more damage from the operation, I started to have my seizures got worse again when I was recovering in hospital. And I had some physio. They let me out when I could walk 6 steps because I was having trouble walking. And at that time, I was on quite a lot of anti-seizure drugs, so it's like a zombie. And I wasn't eating because I didn't have any appetite. And then a week later, on a Friday evening, once I'd got home, I was called by the neurosurgeon who was very apologetic, and in his kind of tone, and I thought, oh, okay, what's going on here? And he told me over the phone that he was unable to remove all of the mass in my head. So okay, and then he told me, and we had to leave some in the motor cortex area of your brain, because it was infiltrating, and we couldn't remove that. And so I thought, okay. And you told me that I could live with this and it would be fine anyway, so that's fine. And then he said, that would be fine, but but I have to tell you that unfortunately we didn't get he didn't say we've made a mistake. He just said unfortunately the histopathology has come back. And surprisingly, it's come back as this highly aggressive brain tumor, which was so vascular that we couldn't identify what it actually was. And he said, I've booked you for a radiotherapy and chemotherapy consultation with the radiation oncologist on Tuesday. And he said that what you have is incurable but treatable. And I said, well, what is the well, I was speechless, but I was thinking, well, he asked me, do you have any questions? Like, he's telling me that and I just said, is this going to kill me? And he said, yes, it will, but we'll try and prolong that period as much as possible. And I just broke down in tears and didn't know what to say. And just gave the phone to my mum, and then she broke down in tears and hung up. And I was still having seizures at this point, and my head felt like it had gone through someone was rummaging around in my brain after opening my skull up, so I didn't feel too great. Also had all this additional trauma, and so I became very depressed. And one of the first things I did was, in between having seizures, and between that time from the Friday to that Tuesday for that appointment, I'd just done a ton of research, and I got the book Cancer as a Metabolic Disease. It came really quickly, which is amazing. And I contacted Professor Seyfried. The reason I knew, the way that I knew about that book was through that lecture that I remembered having on the ketogenic diet. Because that book was mentioned, and it was highly unusual. That was actually quite a controversial lecture that we had. That course didn't run much longer after that, actually. And so, yeah, I'd done all this research, and I'd immediately thought, I'm going to go on a ketogenic diet, not for the cancer, because I was reading this, I thought it was very interesting, but it can't be that simple. We need some glucose, for the brain to function. And also cancer cells use other fuels, so how is this going to help me? I'll do it for the epilepsy because that's annoying. And yeah, I'm not able to live any kind of life, so if it has any benefit for that, it's worth doing. And so I put myself on a 4-to-1 ketogenic diet. Thankfully, I had my background in nutrition, so I knew how to do that in a way that I thought would be best. And I found it really hard because my diet before had lots of carbs, and it was very stressful, but I was persevering. I was very motivated to do as well as I could. And then anyway, I had that appointment on the Tuesday about chemotherapy and radiotherapy. After all the fear tactics I was given and told about how horrible my prognosis was, I decided to go ahead with it. And until the point where I'd educated myself enough after going through it and feeling horrible and learning more about the histopathology results, that my tumor would likely not respond because I had mutations or didn't have mutations which were good mutations to have for treatment sensitivity and for a better prognosis. So I decided to stop having the treatment. And I should mention that when I first started going on this ketogenic diet, I made sure I was on an anti-seizure drug called sodium valproate, also known as valproic acid. The brand's name is Epilum. Put myself on that because I'd done research where I found it complements a ketogenic diet very nicely. And the ketogenic diet also helps these drugs to be more effective. They make them more potent. And so I made sure I was on that drug, and the more research I did, the more I found it also has very potent anti-cancer benefits for brain tumors. And also that it has mood stabilizing properties. And because I had such a difficult history with my mental health issues, I thought this would be perfect for me to go on. And it's not always prescribed because it can have horrible side effects, and it can cause deformed births in children if you decide that somehow for some time you want children. And it wasn't an issue for me because I didn't think I'd lived that long anyway. So I decided to ask for that drug and made sure I was on it. And I was already on the maximum dose of another drug. So I thought, I was feeling crap. So I thought I'll add this other drug and I'll make sure I'm on a lot of it. So it's a therapeutic dose. And I'll try and make it even more effective by having really high blood ketones, because I was measuring my blood ketones and blood glucose at the time under the supervision of a charity called Matthew's Friends, which at the time was getting into the brain tumor space by treating brain tumor-related epilepsy. And so that was interesting. It's kind of a lot of this focus on ketogenic diets and cancer comes from brain tumors because a large proportion of patients do have brain tumor-related epilepsy. And so that's like a jump towards being able to say that you're seeing cancer patients, because otherwise it's very difficult. And just saying that you're treating the epilepsy. At this point, I was still very skeptical about any anti-cancer benefits because I knew glutamine was a major fuel, and I thought, well, a ketogenic diet is naturally high in glutamine, so what are we doing here? And then I just did more and more research, and I found that the benefits of a ketogenic diet for cancer go beyond starving the cancer of glucose. Even the ketones themselves have actions on several signaling pathways in cancer that have this anti-cancer effect. And so that was my main focus. I just wanted to make sure I was in what I'd then established as a therapeutic range with my ketones and glucose. And annoyingly, I was still having seizures. So I thought, well, how can I continue with this diet if I'm still having seizures? And with certain ketogenic foods, it's getting worse. And I'd noticed these patterns. And so after noticing these patterns, I did more research and I found out about oligoantigenic ketogenic diets. And I thought, what's an oligoantigenic ketogenic diet? It's a funny name. And all it is really is a type of elimination diet. And this research came about because it was found that with epilepsy, many types of epilepsy, you can have seizures that are kind of like an allergic reaction to foods. And so it comes from that way, that antigenic, you have that kind of response to these the compounds in these foods. And so I thought, oh well, that's really interesting because I have a history of allergies as a child. I wonder if that's related. I don't know if it is, but it was interesting. And I had some food sensitivities, but not like this. And so there was clearly a gut-brain connection, which seemed to, my symptoms seemed to improve dramatically when I did my experiments, excluding certain foods that I'd identified were triggering these responses, these seizures. And then I diagnosed myself with reflex epilepsy after identifying at the time the majority of these triggers that I could identify whereby when I would exclude these triggers, not just food related, but also stress, poor sleep, certain smells, certain tastes as well. So sweeteners I couldn't tolerate, caffeine couldn't have. I noticed that over time these were all plant foods that I couldn't tolerate. So my diet ended up being a carnivorous ketogenic diet. And because I'd researched the work of Weston A. Price, I thought, is there a better way I could do this, where I could optimize nutrient density while sticking to therapeutic ketosis, a therapeutic ketogenic diet. And so I went about doing that, and I had hyperbaric oxygen therapy and took exogenous ketones as well, and was having magnesium to try and in different forms to try and get off the medication because I was having quite bad side effects. And over the course of that time, I noticed my scans were improving in terms of the enhancement that was showing. Now, I should point out that these scans can be fairly ambiguous, so it could have been anything. You always err on the side of caution, thinking it could be disease progression, but because I'm quite skeptical about everything, and I try to prove myself wrong about everything, I always say, well, it's speculative, but that signal that we saw eventually, whether it's brain damage or epileptic activity or whatever, eventually dissipated into nothing. So we couldn't see anything on scans then. And also my seizures were getting more controlled to the point where I barely had any, and it was only when I encountered my triggers. And over time, over 2 years, I managed to get off the medication, which was extremely difficult because I was suffering withdrawal seizures as I was coming off very slowly. And I was advised to actually increase my medication rather than decrease. Once I'd come off completely, I realized that there were seizure types that I was experiencing that were caused by the medication. And thankfully, when I was taking the medication, I realized that they actually cause nutrient deficiencies that can make you have these kinds of seizures. So I was taking certain supplements to help with that, of certain certain B vitamins that were depleted as a result of being on the medication. And so, yeah, long story short, I went back to studying cancer biology. And now I'm doing my own brain cancer study to try and identify a metabolic phenotype of glioblastoma I'm focusing on, and to, in a way, to try and see if what helped me was the things that I think helped me. And I've had various blood markers over the years of metabolic health, and I want to see if that my experience is mirrored by a group of patients, and then see if we can target it in a similar way to bring back into balance that phenotype that I think we will see that is a marker of a diseased state, which we're comparing to a group of healthy individuals where we've done a similar study. So they're not diseased, but we made them look like they had a diseased state just by following a standard UK diet, the guidelines actually, which was quite enlightening. But yeah, I can send you that paper. But I'm doing this my own research now, and it's an interesting development because I think it will be a huge thing that would help a lot of people. But I have to do it all on my own. It's a self-funded study, and it's part of my PhD. That's where we are.
Yeah, and that's quite an amazing story, hence me being absolutely mute here and just letting you tell your story. So let's ask a very basic question. I mean, do you still have scans? Is there signs that it's all completely gone? What's the situation?
Well, I have scans once a year, and it's only just routine monitoring. But I was curious about this question because it's not necessarily the case that if you don't see anything on a scan, that means nothing was there. And these cancers invariably return. On the few case studies we have of therapeutic ketogenic diets and high-grade glioma, is that once you relax, the cancer comes back with a vengeance. So there's always been this question for me over the years, and it's been over 11 years now. Question has always been, well, is there a way to see what we can't see? And recently we've had a development of this liquid biopsy technology, which has become highly specific and reliable, which is quite a feat for brain cancer because you've got the blood-brain barrier that, you know, if you're looking at trying to find circulating tumor cells in the blood, you'd think that would be quite a task because if you can find anything, it would be just this kind of such a low signal. How can you identify anything there? But these tests have become so sophisticated that that's now the case with quite high accuracy. And it's very difficult to get this test out to badger the company that makes them. It did have FDA approval last January, but it's very difficult to access. But with my special privileges, I managed to get one. And it identified that I did have this low signal. And we're trying to work out what that means because this test wasn't indicated for someone like me, meaning the test is only really used in special cases where you have an inoperable brain tumor that it's too risky to do a biopsy. And I wanted to have the test to see, firstly, is there anything we can see? And secondly, if we can see something, can we find a solution so that we can obliterate all the cells so it never comes back? And this is a question that no one can answer. But the cool thing about this particular test that I'm having is you can have a second and third test that look at different things. So the second test is looking at the molecular characteristics of that small signal, that what we can see. So it's looking at the genetic profile of it. So then I could compare it to the original tumor and see compare it against the histopathology, see if it's changed. It likely would have, because it's an evolving active thing. It's not going to stay the same, which is partly why all of these cancer treatments for brain tumors are a bit ridiculous, because it's a one-size-fits-all approach. It's constantly changing. What doesn't change too much is the preferential fuels and the metabolism and this mitochondrial dysfunction. So it makes sense to me to treat it, through these metabolic therapies rather than just, these toxic chemotherapeutic agents and radiation. So the next step on this journey is to have that test. And then from that, we can identify metabolic targets. And the third test that I would have looks at the aggressivity of disease. And it's also a test that you can have habitually to identify in real time what the intervention that you're doing has on those circulating tumor cells. So this is completely new, and they hadn't even, I don't think they'd even thought of having it for that purpose. So it's uncharted territory, and it's very exciting because I'm aiming to completely cure it.
Yeah, and so I'm going to broaden it out a little bit, if you don't mind, Andrew. Just let's talk about food, and then maybe come back to a bit more nuance, because I think it's fascinating. I'm going to ask you a blunt question. Do you think if you'd have followed what would be the normal sort of advice to do a plant-based diet or a vegan diet, do you think you'd be in the same situation that you are now, or do you think that would have not helped you?
Well, I was already on a similar diet anyway, just adding fish and eggs. So I don't think it would have helped me at the time. I should probably say that my diet evolves with time. So I did go from that 4-to-1 ketogenic diet to a more, what I now know is a Paleolithic ketogenic diet, which is a carnivorous ketogenic diet it's very nutrient dense and contains organ meats and all these other things. I went from that to now I'm on a ketovore diet, which is I have some foods that I couldn't tolerate before, which is really interesting. But I also have it's like kind of like a cyclical carnivorous ketogenic diet. So most of the time I just eat meat, fish, eggs, organ meats. Yeah, that's it really. And then the rest of the time I might include some avocado, which I have mashed up so I don't have it when it's really fibrous. So it's easier to digest. I have macadamia nuts. I have olives, unpasteurized olives, because most of the olives that you get in this country are actually pasteurized, especially if you get them from the supermarket. Even if you look at the ingredients and it's just olives and some, I don't know, acidity regulator or whatever. It's pasteurized, so you can get unpasteurized olives, and that's why I have no issues with them. So it doesn't make sense to exclude them just for some ideology. I don't know. I just follow what makes me feel good. So
yeah. Do you know what the pasteurization process does then to olives that makes it difficult for you, whereas unpasteurized? Do you know what the difference is? What compounds are there or not there?
I think it's just the process that they. I don't know. I just have probiotics, so I like having those foods. I don't know if it's better or not. I just feel good.
Well, that's the acid test, isn't it? I mean,
yeah. And the other thing is I don't like to. So if you compare having olive oil to having olives, I always prefer to have the food. It's the same thing with cod liver. I have cod liver often because I know about the benefits of cod liver oil, but I prefer to have cod liver. It makes more sense to me than to have all of this oil.
Yeah, I have cod liver, and I tried soft cod roes for the first time yesterday. So when you said there were certain foods that triggered you, and they were all plant foods, is there some similarity in those plant foods, some compound in there that is definitely a no-no, do you think?
Yeah, initially it was food science salicylates. So even coconut oil, it just gave me horrific migraines. And when I started on a ketogenic diet, I was having coconut oil and thinking, my seizures are getting worse and I'm getting migraines. How is this helping me? And then I switched to just having animal fats as my fats. And I realized actually not only am I not having the migraines, but my ketones are actually higher and I feel better. And so that was interesting.
Yeah. I think that's a very interesting story. And I just want to say to people, Andrew is not this serious in real life, but it's a serious subject. And we had a long chat over the weekend at the PHC conference. And when we do our private WhatsApps or some of our lives, you have a great sense of humour. Do you think your sense of humour helped you get through this?
100%, yeah. And I tried to make it fun as well. So when I started on a ketogenic diet to manage the brain tumor and the brain tumor related epilepsy, I started to eat brains. And mainly initially that was just as like a challenge. But then I found I really actually loved the taste. And so, I was eating brains and I was eating insects and all these other things. And a lot of it was from studying anthropology and how we evolved eating insects and oily fish. And so I focused my diet a lot on seafood, which I still do, because I think if you look at the brain's development and how the brain thrives, it's largely made up of docosahexaenoic acid, which is a long chain omega-3 fatty acid. And in and around the brain tumors, you have this dysregulation of lipids, this imbalance, whereby it's more in favor of arachidonic acid, which is part of that pro-inflammatory pathway. And so the DHA actually can help bring that back into balance and can improve seizure control. So I focused on that and grass-fed lamb because it's a better fatty acid profile compared to other kind of meats. What was the question?
I asked you whether your sense of humour got you through, and you said it did. So that was
yeah, definitely. Because it was pretty bleak, and I was trying to make it fun. Because otherwise, it's just stressful. You're changing all these things, and if you make it fun and if you make it social, then it doesn't feel like a chore or like you're suffering or like you're missing anything. So yeah.
I mean, I was going to start this interview a bit glib and say both of us on the screen have been told by the medical associations or societies 10 years ago we wouldn't be here by now, because it's my 60th birthday tomorrow. And when I had my coronary artery calcium scan, the chances of me living for the next 5 years, this was 10 years ago, was pretty remote. And but I thought, no, I just dive straight into your story. I didn't want people to think it's going to be a glib sort of comical or whatever laugh thing, because it's not really about that. But in the end, being bleak and not being interested and being very depressed and not taking control yourself can have a very negative effect. I mean, I've been told two things in my past where it was pretty horrible. When I was 23, I was told I'd be in a wheelchair at 50, and I was shown a convincing image. You were talking about images, and I'd really like to come back to that, actually. And I just didn't believe it. I just didn't think it was right. My gut feeling was like, no, I don't think that's going to happen to me. And obviously, I'm still playing soccer at 60, so that definitely didn't happen. And then the other one was the coronary artery calcium scan. Although I would say that was all online and putting numbers into calculators. The actual consultant laughed it off, literally laughed it off, and said, yeah, I've had someone with a 3,000 score, you'll be all right. Like that, really genuinely like that. And I think, although it is bleak, it is worth taking control, finding out, not being scared of it, and not necessarily believing what, authority says, because it doesn't mean they're right. And one of the things that really shines out is a study I learned about in my rehab practice. Now, this isn't as serious as what you had, but I was interested in why glucosamine, which seemed with patients to cause huge improvements in pain relief, and yet studies don't show that. And it was all down to imaging, because the people that had to take part in studies had to have something on an image that clearly improved. And many pains don't show up on images. You can't see them on an X-ray or an MRI, and that is one of the biggest frustrations I've had in 15 years of rehab. People coming in and saying, everyone keeps telling me there's nothing wrong with me, and I'm racked in agony. And glucosamine is definitely one of those supplements. I'm not recommending that, by the way. I'm just using that as an example. The glucosamine seemed to work for a lot of people to manage or lessen the pains, but it was all down to imaging. You can't take an image of pain. So when people talk to you about this, sorry about this, Andrew, but it is the way people talk. Do you see yourself as managing it, stopping the progression of it, cured? Where do you put yourself with this treatment?
I'd say managing with the intention of cure.
Yeah.
Because if I can get that low signal to be nothing, then it looks like I've cured it. So that's the next step. And I don't know anyone who has done that. Because the only way you would otherwise tell if someone is cured is if you do an autopsy when they've died.
Absolutely.
But we have this technology now, and it's really interesting. Does that mean that's cured? And possibly, yes. So that's something that I'm not even doing a study on. I'm just using myself as a human guinea pig, and maybe it will be written up because it's quite remarkable.
Yeah. You've done an amazing job. And do you enjoy this way of eating?
Well, it's just my life now. I don't really think about it. So yeah, I enjoy how it makes me feel. And I don't know anyone who, unless they're lying, who doesn't enjoy eating like a roast lamb, for example. It's my favorite thing to eat. And I eat a lot of eggs. I like eggs. So, but I cook them in a very specific way. So I never cook the yolk. I always have it runny.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah,
The way that I cook anything is very intentional because I don't like to overcook anything. I don't think that's healthy, and I know people have different ideas on that, but I just think burnt meat is not it's not good. And with fish, I like to very gently, very lightly cook. I like to have it poached usually.
Yeah, and I think I'm that way inclined. I've had a bit of a struggle because I've written this cookbook and I do meal plans, and the timing in there is you have to be careful what you say to people. Personally, I would cook most things slightly less than the recommended timings. Right. The other thing that came out in our conversation, we had a sort of very similar discussion about our mothers. My mother was told to lose weight. She was subsequently had a 9-pound colon cancer growth, even though she never touched red meat and she never ate saturated fat, and was given some pretty bad advice. But anyway, it's not about my mum. But you mentioned your mother, and I just wondered would you mind sharing that story?
Yeah, so I grew up with my mum. My dad wasn't really around much. And she spent most time with me compared to my 2 older brothers. And she was always very, very thoughtful about health and wellness, very similar to me. Didn't like taking many medications, was always very cautious about what she was taking. And she was told by a doctor that she had osteopenia and that this would likely get worse. And it's interesting anyway, because my mum had East African bone structure. And one of the ways they test this, one of the limited knowledge that I have, is to compare against the norm, which would be someone with a more Northern European bone structure. They're quite different. And so I had wondered about that. And so initially she just tried to do load-bearing exercise, and then she seemed to be pressured into thinking this drug's going to help you along with to take medication, and this drug's going to help you alongside the other things you're doing. And she asked about the risks and benefits, and it seemed like they didn't tell her that there were any risks from taking it, and that it would only provide benefit. And so weighing that up, and being her age, she thought, I'll take this and see, how I go. And so she was taking this drug, which was like a horse tablet, and required you to stand up for at least 15 minutes before you can sit down and move around, so that the tablet could go down. And it's this very acidic kind of tablet that over time we found caused a tumor to develop it caused damage to the esophageal lining, and a tumor developed. So she was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. And there initially, as with your mum, she had no risk factors. So we found this very odd. She didn't really drink, didn't smoke, was very healthy, very mindful of her diet. And so it was baffling until I did a lot of research again, because I like to try and find out why things happen. I don't think there's just bad luck, and it's just, These things just spontaneously occur. And so I thought about this tablet she was taking, and I thought, surely surely that could be at least a contributing factor. And so from doing my research, I found this research group in the US where they showed that there was a strong association with taking this medication and esophageal cancer. So I contacted them and I said, look, this is what my mum's been diagnosed and this is what happened. And then what we did is we went to see a gastroenterologist privately about it and asked, well, what do you think of this? And from your observations, what can you tell? And from the biopsy, it was clear that there was the characteristic damage that had been shown in this study that caused these esophageal cancers to form. And it was to the point where it was definitive that was the cause. And initially the NHS denied it. And then they thought, oh, well, maybe, but we can't, it's very you still can't say definitive, even though this research group said, yeah, it's pretty open and shut case is pretty definitive. But yeah, it was just lots of frustration, lots of stress. And my mum was very angry when she found that out. And she was asked loads of questions to be included in the future study looking at this, because they're still compiling all the research of all of these cases, and there's a lot of them. Mostly in the US. They're not really tracking it here, which is scandalous. And they're still not telling patients that this is even a risk, even though it's quite a significant risk of esophageal cancer. And she had treatment for that. She did really well past her prognosis until she had a secondary cancer of colon cancer, which was probably caused by the treatment she had for the first cancer, just causing problems with her GI tract. And so, yeah, there were loads of mistakes in her actually getting that diagnosis. And it was very late stage by then, so couldn't really intervene with anything. And then, yeah, she was dead within a few months.
Wow. Yeah. And it's frightening, because my father was told he had a calcium deficiency and within a week he was dead. And my mother was told to lose weight, and within a week she was in hospital.
The thing about what you just said, at the time my mum was taking supplemental calcium, which I said stop doing that, because that can be very harmful, not just for the heart, but in general. It's not, supplemental calcium is not a good thing to take.
It's the wrong form, isn't it? It's normally calcium carbonate for a start, which is not very absorbable. Anyway, I was hoping to finish on a high. It is a serious subject. Your health, your mother's, my parents. I lost a girlfriend as well with breast cancer, but we fight the good fight. We try and get the information out there, and the only thing we can do is still keep questioning what we're told. If it doesn't feel right, it doesn't seem to be working, then you have to do your best. And Andrew, it's been an absolute pleasure to listen to you. It was really great to meet you at the weekend. I've known you for over a year now, and I wanted to get you on because your story is, hopefully, although it's sort of bleak, it's also inspirational, because it shows you can take control, you can do your own research, and you can look at things in a different light. And as you're doing with the research groups, expanding the knowledge, so eventually, generations to come won't encounter those sort of problems, because the news will be out there. It'd just be nice if the pharmaceutical companies started to play ball a bit more and were a bit more open and transparent about their studies, I think. But anyway, Andrew, is there a final thought you want to leave with?
Final thought. Just to not take things too seriously and try and enjoy the process. If you have to go on a ketogenic diet or carnivore diet for any kind of health issue, try and make it fun and try and connect with other people who are doing it. I do a lot of fasting, and I also take boswellic acids if I ever have neuroinflammation, something I probably should have mentioned, but it's a very good thing to take for just general systemic inflammation, but also the brain. Just try and enjoy life and think about your environment. Don't just think about food, because it makes the diet side easier if you're happy and in a happy environment. I recently moved away from London, and it's one of the best things that I've ever done. And because when I was in London, I was trying all these biohacks so that my environment was still as positive and beneficial as it could be for me, but it was more of an uphill battle. The more stressed I got and the more of these toxic exposures I was encountered with. So if you can find a place to be at peace and connect with nature, stay away from artificial light as much as possible, because that can even affect how you metabolize how you metabolize what you eat. So people don't realize that, they don't think about it, but it's a big thing. And yeah, that's it really.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.